What up, everybody? Scuff D here, and we're going to be doing ourselves another card-by-card reboot. We're going to be taking a look at the Iron Hands today. The Iron Hands were the first official Loyalist faction added to the game. They appeared in the Istvan 5 expansion set. And they were the first expansion faction, as it were. The initial factions, or the initial set, was this Istvan 3 set, and that had the Sons of Horus, Emperor's Children, World Eaters, and Death Guard. Istvan 5 brought to us Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard. Out the gate, there was a lot that had not been implemented yet in the game. So that's really important to note as I first discussed the cards and how the faction has come, because they've had a lot of ups and downs, many more downs in the middle, and a lot more ups kind of coming up here, and I think part of that is due to some of the newer cards that have been added to the game. Initially, when the faction came out, there was no initiative. Initiative was not a thing at that time. So at the time when they debuted, they were really just a coin flip toss if you were going to go first with Ferrus Manus or Santar. DuCaine was the fourth warlord, and I believe by the time DuCaine was released, initiative had been added into the game. Because we had gone through, I believe, up until Salamanders, and then Salamanders saw initiative. If I remember correctly, I could be wrong. It could be right at the tail end of the Iron Hands release, we got initiative, and then Salamanders. But before we had Raven Guard, we had initiative. And that changed things a little bit. Initially, Ferrus Manus was a low initiative. Santar is still a low initiative. And that threw off the momentum that Ferrus Manus could have early on coming into the game, as well as several of the cards, the playstyle. However, when they first debuted, the relentless mechanic was very, as it had never been seen before. And as the neutral card pool and tactics were not massively on the same scale that they are now in terms of dealing with troops, Relentless could very quickly get out of hand. Cards like Sabotage at the time cost 3 energy versus the 1 energy that it costs now, so there wasn't a quick and easy answer to it. Believe it or not, there was you either had to get rid of their stuff early on or deal with the potential threat that their Relentless troops could grind out. Then initiative hit, and more neutral cards were added to the pool. And from there, for quite some time, the faction kind of stagnated and slid down the hill. A lot of the cards we're going to talk about were updated slightly. Some of them made major improvements and are kind of key cards to the faction. And some of them have not really pulled their weight. So first off, let's talk about Amadeus DuCaine. As a warlord, I think he's a fun warlord to play. Anybody who played the events with the Iron Hands all the way past the Istvan 3 expansion will attest to how powerful DuCaine can be in events. He's very powerful in the fact that it's a limited scale thing and there's only so many removal options. I generally run him for challenge decks now, hence the low play rate. He's usually good for just sitting there and healing and not using his ability, or just playing Relentless troops. And that's about it. But he has some potential in the same way that any frontline warlord can. You can protect those troops. His ability used to cost 2 energy on release. I think they scaled it back relatively quickly to the 1 energy. It just made more sense that way. He doesn't do anything else. His passive has always remained the same. And his initiative, I believe, has always been at medium. He's a decent warlord. The ability to heal constantly to your troops, especially those troops that you want to keep around that have 2 or 3 health, or 3 or 4 health, that's important. So that's a good ability to have, especially late game. Not bad. He's a good warlord. I have fun playing him, and he's got some great emotes. Now, Ferrus Manus, I use him mostly, honestly, for challenge decks. Here's this a little disclaimer. I use the Iron Hands mainly for like half my challenge decks. They play very well for a lot of the challenge builds. So some of this is just fun. But Ferrus Manus has improved from where he was. As I mentioned, he was low initiative. His ability has always been the same in terms of paying to buff up a troop. His Reckoning received some changes, not necessarily his Reckoning form, but I believe the cost for him to reckon. This was changed once or twice. At one point, it was -1 when your Iron Hands troop dies, or -2 when your iron troops die. The cost might have been 18. But if you're playing Iron Hands and your troops are relentless, you're not going to want them to die. That's the point. You're going to want to build them up and get them buffed up and get them stronger, not throw them away and grind. So when his reckoning changed, and he gained that initiative, he actually beefed up quite a bit, because now you can throw a lot of neutral Imperial Army cards in there, very cheap value, low value cards that are going to feed into that. Multi-value cards. Cards like Ecology, which is a new card to that game, and really is just... it's good for a lot of decks, Ferrus Manus especially, because you're constantly putting out infantry, which are going to die, and that's going to lower your reckoning. You can buff them if you want. You can, and then when this is destroyed, you can put out 5 more troops, which is going to lower your reckoning. Arcology is a very good card. Do you have to play with it with Ferrus Manus? You don't have to. Absolutely not. Playing with one does make it a little bit easier if you're going for reckoning. However, you can also play Ferrus Manus and not go for Reckoning. That's perfectly acceptable. Although his Reckoning mode is a beast. When he heals that +1, and this did see a change, now that I think about it. This used to be Relentless Gain +10 and Heal 2. So he used to heal more, but they scaled that back just a smidge, and now he just heals 1. And the reason being is because on release, Servo Arm did not work the way it does now. But when they did change it, they realized that in conjunction with the Super Saiyan God Blue Kaioken ×10 Goku form that is Ferrus Manus in Reckoning, you could have a 12 attack Ferrus Manus who heals 6 every turn, and that's just nasty. So Ferrus Manus is actually very decent. He gets supported well by the card pool within the Iron Hands, and you can build him several different ways, and he's got a very solid, long sustainability plan. He's got some very obvious weak spots in terms of once he does go into Whispers, he has Berserk, so he has to attack. So throwing down front lines works wonderful. If you hang on to Yiria the Seducer, that really throws a wrench in his game plan. But as I mentioned, cards like Arcology, a lot of these cultist troops really can feed into that too. If you're able to start generating cultist troops, or you've got a lot of low-cost guys, you can use these guys to fuel a Chaos Ferrus Manus, and they are enhancing themselves as well as with synergy, plus whatever Imperial or Demon troops that you want to throw out, and really throw a curveball out there. And there's nothing like giving, a Beast of Fire +1/+2. It can be done, and it's nasty. Now, Santar has taken a little bit of a hit, just slightly, in the fact that with the inclusion of Custodes and Ruinstorm, because his ability slowly loses steam every time there is a non-Astartes or infantry faction that's introduced into the game that he can't just sink his claws into. He's a very good warlord in the same way that Manus is, Ferrus Manus, because he can go the distance. He can tank up and do a little bit of damage and use the Iron Hand cards to heal, because he's in that Terminator armor, but he lacks a Reckoning, so he really has to play a little bit more with his ability to deal that damage. And if he can't do the same amount of damage consistently to demon troops or to troops with ward, then he's going to suffer. Throw in the fact that he's got low initiative, and that hurts. Now, the Iron Hands gaining this counterattack, which quite frankly is one of my favorite counterattacks, giving shield to your warlord, either early game or late game, that is very effective. It's very nice. Late game, if you throw that on when your opponent has nothing on the board, or you can use it to, use your 2 or 3 attack to get rid of your opponent's troop, take no damage to yourself. It really throws things off for your opponent. And the fact that Santar's got low initiative, and he's most likely going to get that, is something to consider if you're building Santar. As far as ability goes, though, he's not changed. His ability is very reliable, very consistent. He has not warranted any change. Chadric Medusan did receive a slight change. His ability here was the energy for his power to give sneak attack to a friendly troop this turn. Used to cost 2, and that's pretty pricey given the fact that, you got to have a troop survive in the game. But what he really benefited from, because at the time when he debuted, flank was not even an option. It wasn't existing. Flank did not debut until the Raven Guard, which were two sets later. Not 2 sets, but 2 faction releases later. So flanking wasn't even a thing. So your best bet to use Medusan to give sneak attack would be to a fast unit like Goldstone Hunters, which was, by the way, the only fast unit at the time for the Iron Hands to be able to play. But 2 sets later, and we have a variety of flanking units that you can either borrow, steal, create, or just include in your deck. You can have the old Vorax, which used to be a 3/4. Give that flank. Or it's got flank, but give it sneak attack. So they come in. You could give Volturax sneak attack. You could also just use Forge Fane, give yourself 2 more Vorax, give them sneak attack. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Also, I think early builds for him used Escape Vent on Astartes infantry, and then they would put them out there, or you would use stealth troops, either stealth Mechanicum troops or stealth Imperial Army troops. Bring out your, where are they? I think they're probably the Imperial guys. Yeah, I'm in the wrong tab. If you were to deploy, for instance, on your 4 energy and drop out these Philesian 5th Airborne for 5 energy, or for 1 energy on your next turn, sneak attack with them, maybe enhance them with cards of the Iron Hands card pool, such as Power Mace. Suddenly you've got a 7/3 sneak attack, and your opponent has got to dump resources into that. I did a Medusan deck a while back. I think it was still after Vorax had health reduction, and it's still a nice fun deck. Medusan as an entry card plays well. He used to have an additional card offered to him, but I think when they reduced his sneak attack, they gave him they took that card away, kind of to compensate, because he could do it a little bit quicker. But it's been a while since I played Medusan, but he does play well with a lot of neutrals. There's some good Relentless troops in there, but you don't necessarily need to use them. Using flankers to draw the board and to put pressure on your opponent is super effective. Bionic Eye is nice for a rare in the fact that it heals 2 to a friendly unit, which can be any unit, and then it removes stealth from all your opponent's units. Now, this often gets overlooked when we talk stealth removal in the game, but it is arguably one of the best stealth removals in the game. Cost-wise, huge. It's on par with Arcadia's, which is a 1/1 troop, and in exchange for this, you're actually gaining 2 health. You're not getting the troop on the board, but at the same time, you're still getting rid of all stealth. Not random stealth, not 1 unit, not doing damage, you're just removing the stealth. Bionic Eye works perfectly for Santar, who can heal and then use his ability to take out whatever's in stealth mode. It also just works for good healing in general. It's a nice handy pinch if you're not looking to include cards like Skitarii Protector or the like. It's worth considering at least as a one-of in most Iron Hands decks if you're building it to be competitive. You may want some other random damage in place of it, but at least 1 is not bad. Fierro Squad, these guys, in events they shine really well because they're very cheap and easy to put out. They don't see a lot of play in ladder or normal games unless you're playing like a challenge deck, just because they don't do anything beyond that 3 health. Unless you're able to pump them up with Ferrus Manus, you're not going to keep them around very long. And even if you do, you're actually not getting your money's worth there, because you're pumping them up with 2 to make them a 3/5. And then, or 2/5, and then they use their ability, so you're spending 3 damage to keep this 1 troop on the board and deal 2 damage to your opponent. You're spending 3 energy. It's not an even exchange. If you're in a position where you can stay ahead, that's great, but if you're not, it's not fantastic, and ultimately these guys can be replaced for something else in the deck. And Power Mace is the same as it's always been, giving +2/+0 to a friendly troop. It often gets overlooked, but it's very nice if you can stick it on those flank troops for Medusan, or even a fast troop. It kind of comes out of nowhere like a surprise, but that 2 extra damage sometimes is all it takes. You don't get anything else, you don't draw a card for it. It's a common. If you're building your faction up and you need something for increasing the attack value of some units, or just for a little extra punch, and you don't have any other good tactics, it's worth considering. Now the Storm. Oh, we could talk about the Storm all day, or at least longer than we need to. The Storm used to cost 2 energy. I don't believe it costs 3. I could be scratching my head. Early on release, it might have, but I don't think so. I think it's always been a 2 energy epic. And this card thematically is very cool. It has been changed, and I think the change is better, less punishing to the Iron Hands player. Initially, the text for the Storm read, your troops gain frontline and survivor 1. Enemy cards cost 5 less until your next turn. And the idea with that would be to use that on your troops, Give them some buff, Survivor, and then bait your opponent to empty their entire hand. To which point on your next turn, you play Defensive Satellites or the Hammer or some other massive board damage and get rid of all their stuff. Maybe get rid of all your stuff too, but now you've got a full hand and they're empty and they're just playing with the top deck of the top card of their deck. But it was especially as the game allowed for more and more cards that drew cards or created cards, this became very problematic. I played one event. It was an event game, and my opponent played the Storm on me. And I played Captured Forge for 1 energy. Now, Captured Forge creates cards in my hand that cost 2 less. And that stacked with the Storm, which meant that I was getting vehicles in my hand that cost 7 less for that turn. And I didn't lose any cards. I played 1 card and I gained 3, and I played all those cards. And then I played 1 other card on top of that. And it was brutal. It was like the worst idea for a card. I think it's a little bit better now in the fact that it only allows for your opponent to empty their troops and not their tactics, especially as we have a lot more decks that are heavy tactics. This could allow for an infinite trap span with Bronzy. If your opponent is an Alpha Legion, they throw out Bronzy. And as a matter of fact, I believe there is somebody on record whose game would still be going on for today if it had not bugged out after like 999 traps or something like that. It was insane. They were playing a bot, and the bot just kept making traps and playing them for free and building up his deck to an insane amount. And yeah, that's problematic. So I think having it make just enemy troops cost 5 less or better. It costs 1 energy. You have to build your deck with this in mind. You don't just throw this into your deck and say, yeah, we'll see if it works. You have to know what you're doing when you play the card, as well as why you're including this card in your deck. This is not a epic for beginners, and if you're not sure about it, you can pass on this in the shop. You don't need to have this to play the Iron Hands. As a matter of fact, you really don't need to have this to play the Iron Hands anyways, but if you wanted to try something different with them, you certainly could. You certainly could choose to raise the Storm. Now, heavy weaponry is one that I don't see as much of. As much as I see Power Mace, which is a surprise when I do see it, heavy weaponry is actually better in the fact that for 1 energy more, it gives +2/+0 to all of your vehicles versus 1 energy giving +2/+0 to a friendly troop. Now, while this is just vehicles, there are a lot more vehicles added to the game, especially talking about Medusan. Those flanking vehicles did not exist in the game, and all of a sudden, if you've got 2 Voraxes on the table that survived on your turn, the next turn you pay 2 energy. They're now 5s with Bloodthirst, and you can use Medusan to give them sneak attack, or at least give them one of them sneak attack, as well as any other tanks or, Kaimus, Mechanicum, 8 drops, 9 drops out there. It's a powerful card. It's a surprise card. It's not something to build around, but if you find your deck has got a lot of vehicles in it, it's a very easy common to throw in, and there's no massive penalty to play it. I think for its cost and for its reward, it's very good. Taric Squad is probably, I would argue that the epics in this faction are very good. With the Storm being the worst. Taric Squad, I would argue, is probably a top 2. It's definitely one of the strongest 2-drops in the game. If you can put down Taric Squad first turn, and your opponent cannot get rid of it, and you are able to support it or protect it on your next turn, either by using DuCaine's ability or increasing its damage and its health by Ferrus Manus, you can really put the hurt on your opponent and gain just a huge advantage. I really like those. I think those feel like an automatic pickup 2 of them because they're just going to help you so much. They're going to put a lot of pressure on your opponent to get rid of them and take that pressure off of your opponent dealing with your warlord. And as I said, if you can protect them, you're going to have a really good strong lead. So Taric Squad is a very good epic. Urlok Squad. Now, believe it or not, Urlok Squad has got the same stat line and ability as the old Meldon Squad. The Death Guard Meldon Squad used to be a 1/5, but they aren't anymore because they could come out with first wave. There's no such thing for the Iron Hands, so Urlok Squad costs 2, but it's still a 1/5. It's okay, and it sees a lot of play, like either late game as a surprise front line to throw off your opponent, or early on to protect those Taric Squads and the like. They are susceptible to Breach. They're susceptible to Ambassador Melgator, anything that just does damage. They may not last very long, and their attack is not going to do them much. They really are a speed bump, but they can be an effective speed bump, and I feel like for a 2-drop as a common, they're a decent inclusion into the deck, into any Iron Hands deck. Varric Squad is trash. This is bad. This is just a bad card. This is not a card that even I don't see. I don't even see, like, even in events, you wouldn't play it because it has 1 health. Even though it's got 4 attack and it's got unstoppable, it has 1 health, which means anything, defensive satellite, ricochet, any sort of random damage is just going to take this thing out, let alone warlords who actually have the ability to do 2 damage or even 1 damage with like Argyle Tal or Nirat Kyrene. So these guys are just terrible. Just terrible. They're not good at all. Pass on those. Bana Squad is good, and they got better as the game progressed. They draw a vehicle from your deck. When they first debuted, there was some Mechanicum vehicles. There was a couple Imperial Army vehicles. There was Nogheil for the Chaos. And that's kind of about it. And then you had, the Imperial, the Iron Fist vehicles. You're like, okay, well, I guess. But now, with the game being the way it is, we have a lot more vehicles, and some of them are low cost and some of them are high cost. We've got some more moderately low cost vehicles, 4s, 3s, but we've got some very good flankers. I've always liked Delta Omega, but they get underplayed. But there's just a lot more vehicle potential out there for you to draw, especially if you're looking for mid game to bring out that flanker, to have that in hand. Anytime you can tutor a vehicle or a specific card via like an effect like supply lines or war room, you're going to benefit because it's going to improve your efficiency of your deck. So if you are finding your deck, or you desire to play with a lot of vehicles in an Iron Hands deck, there's absolutely no reason not to have those guys in there. They're very good, and for their stats and for their trade-off 3 for 3/3, but you're also getting a card that you have in your deck, not like a random card. So hey, I've got 5 vehicles in my deck and they're all what I want for next turn. I'm going to get it, I'm going to play it next turn, and you're good to go. These guys are good. Sistar was one of those cards that early on, due to there being very little removal options, not as many tactics, there was seek and destroy that dealt damage to troops, and that was kind of it. Believe it or not, this feels like a lesson in damage tactics, and it kind of is, but it's not entirely. Believe it or not, when the Iron Hands came out, in terms of dealing with troops, there was hard removal for whatever faction that you had. You had your faction specific damage tactics, but as far as neutral tactics go, there was seek and destroy. Just go through here. Just keep going. Just keep going. There was defensive satellites. You see what I'm passing all those ones? There was crack grenade. There was melt-a-bomb, and melt-a-bomb's a specific card removal. That was it. There was no ricochet. There was no mortar strike. Informant network came at the end of the entire expansion. So when they came out, when the Iron Hands came out, if you didn't have a Seek and Destroy or Warlord that dealt 2 to 3 damage with an ability or some other troop on the board, again, no flanking, Sistar was going to be a pain in your butt from the beginning, constantly drawing cards, reducing its cost by 2, allowing the Iron Hands player to just dump a bunch of stuff on the board. However, that quickly changed up with the inclusion of several of those cards. Artillery Strike, Mortar Strike saw a little bit more play as more tactics were introduced, and you started to see solo Angron because they changed his ability. Sistar became less reliable, and you might get him for a turn, if that. Usually he's a target for the same reason that Jukebox Starsight is. Sistar is a legendary. He's a nice legendary, and if you're building a deck where you've got DuCaine in there and you can keep him alive, he's fantastic. If not, I wouldn't include him. I would pass on him. He's not a required card. He certainly isn't going to do any good late game when you've only got 5 cards left in your deck. That's not what you want. So you can pass on him. Now, Eutropius, I've always liked this artwork. It's very interesting. I like the bionic eye there. It's just solid, just a solid 3-drop. If you can keep him alive, he becomes a 4/4, and either by DuCaine you can heal him, or with Manus you can pump him even stronger, and he can just build up from there. So he is a threat that your opponent has to deal with, and I feel as far as 3-drops go, he's a very good 3-drop. Him and Manus both, very good 3-drops. Now, Halmech Squad is okay. I mean, stat-wise, they're all right. They don't offer anything other than Unstoppable. They've seen most play in the sealed event decks, and that's kind of about it. Most of the time, people are looking for rally effects or relentless effects with their Iron Hands, so there's not a lot of reason to play these guys any other way. I'd rather have a 3/3 that can become a 4/4 and a 5/5 and a 6/6 and a 7/7 versus a 3/4 that I might be able to use once or twice with Unstoppable. Head of the Gorgon. I don't ever see this card played. I think it's been included in some event decks. And again, flank, right? This was the first time we saw flank, but it wasn't on any cards. It just gave flank to a vehicle in our hand. So it was a thing before it was a thing. But again, the amount of vehicles that existed in the game were not huge. Also, the amount of vehicles that exist in the game were minimal that were seen play because of Crack Grenade and Melt-A-Bomb and Ursa Malevolus were brutal to vehicles. They just straight out destroyed vehicles. It was neutral damage all over the place. So vehicles were in a very different spot when the Iron Hands came out. So there was cards that supported vehicles at a time when nobody wanted to play vehicles. Now vehicles are a thing again. They're decent. They don't get returned to hand by Melgator, so that's nice. As long as they have, under 4 attack, over 4 attack. But this card could see some change, especially for the cost that it has. It feels very limited, or it could see some change in terms of its text. But it's one of those cards that just never got played, both because of at the time when it came out, and as the game has progressed, what's the point of giving flank to all the vehicles in my hand if for 1 energy I can give flank to the 1 vehicle I play this turn? If you're playing with flank and that's your intention, then there's no reason to include an additional card in your deck. I think that's overkill, and I don't think it's efficient. Win of the Week is arguably one of the best hard removals in the game. And there's been, some people have some debate about it. I think it's a perfectly balanced card as far as hard removal goes, given everything else. The fact that it destroys a random troop, you can have some degree over that. The fact that it destroys one from your side too, you can have a lot more control over that in terms of if you play troops before or after you play Win of the Week. But I think it's very efficient, and it makes sense for what the Legion does. I think, as given its cost and given how it works, I feel like having 2 in your deck, there's no reason not to. It can get rid of warded troops, and that's fantastic. Dara Squad, again, here's another vehicle pumper. And you're thinking this, like when this faction came out, you're looking at all these cards like, man, these guys are going to be great with vehicles. And I'm still waiting for that Iron Hands vehicles deck. Meanwhile, as we're just like, this is the retro reboot, card by card reboot, where we talk about all the other cards besides the faction. Meanwhile, Tacitus Proctor is playing with vehicles just fine. So yeah, that card doesn't see a lot of play. I play it in my Relentless Challenge deck, and it very rarely goes off because you have to play these guys before you play a vehicle, and then that vehicle has to survive, and they have to survive. It's harder than you think, and it's just not as worthwhile compared to some of the other Relentless effects that you'll see. Now, Deus Ex Ferrum is a great card. Amazing heal, and the fact that it's a rare, you can have 2 of these in your deck. If you're going for a long-term healing, like Gabriel Santar or Ferrus Manus, having 2 of these is huge. If you're not, you want to have at least 1, because this heals 5 to all of your units, and it removes poison. And poison has seen a slight increase in play given Korvax added to the game, as well as rot flies and the like. But healing 5 is huge. There's nothing more frustrating than when your opponent attacks with 4 or 5 of their units, leaving them at 2 health, and you're like, okay, well, I can use this card next turn, and I can get rid of it. And then they just play Deus Ex Ferrum and heal at 5, and you're like, well, never mind. I guess I'll lose this game. It's a very, very good card, and if you don't have it, you want it. It's a rare worth including. Win of the Week and Deus Ex Ferrum, definitely. Galba Squad is probably my favorite and probably the best 4-drop for the Iron Hands, because the way their ability works is it's not relentless. It's just when your enemy puts a troop in play, whether it's fast or flank, you're going to gain that stat buff before they get to do anything with it. So they have to time how they take out Galba Squad carefully, either with tactics and a phase strike, or face strike and then play a fast troop, whatever it's going to be. These guys, if they're left unchecked, they can be huge pains in the butts. Your opponent only has to play 2 troops, and they become out of Melgator range. They become a 5/6, and that's not counting any other enhancements that you might have given them. So these guys are very good. Medusan Carapace, this is a legendary that is good in the fact that it's constantly pinging your opponent's warlord, but it doesn't go in every deck. It goes perfect in that Santar build, that solo Santar build, because with his ability as well as Medusan Carapace, you're dealing 4 damage to something on your opponent's side of the board. And if they just have 1 warlord, you're dealing 4 damage to your opponent's warlord, and it's a better trade-off. But if you're focusing more on troop building, board building, flexibility, Medusan Carapace feels like it could be an easy pass. Now, if you play this on 4 energy at the start of the game the attrition value that you're going to get from it is going to be much better than if you play it later in the game, and that's really kind of one of those cards. And there's several cards that are like that exist in the game. It can be very good, it can be mediocre, but you really have to decide if it's the right fit for your deck. Just throwing it into your deck because it's an Iron Hand legendary is not entirely smart all the time, and it's not a legendary that you have to have. I think there's a couple legendaries that the faction that you have to have, and there's several like Santar and Medusan Carapace that you can pass on. Volkite support. These guys are a 4-drop, but I don't like them as much as I like Galba Squad. While their ability is fantastic, dealing 5 damage to a vehicle, structure, or Titan weapon, and that Titan weapon was a recent inclusion, or 2 to any other unit. Okay, I mean, yeah, you could kill a vehicle with that Volkite, but if they don't have any vehicles, then you just have a 2/5 body out that you might ping for 2, versus having a 3/4 that throws off their ability to put out troops. And if you're using energy, then you're not using energy to put out more troops, and so on and so forth. So Volkite loses some steam from me. Xerxes is, these guys aren't bad. If you, in the same way that if you leave them unchecked or your opponent doesn't know what they're doing, or you throw a bunch of fast troops out or flank troops out and you've got a Xerxes out, these guys can go from a 3/4 to a 7/4 or a 9/4. That can come out of nowhere and surprise your opponent, but you have to do that carefully. They're not something that you want to put in all the time, but if you find yourself that you've got a lot of troops in your deck, they're not bad for a 4-drop. As a common, they're okay. Again, I would still say Galba is the best 4-drop. That's just my preference. Captain Bargus is one of those legendaries that you do want in your deck. While his ability is only a relentless, if you are able to stick Captain Bargus at 5 energy, on curve, or even at 6 energy, and protect him with DuCaine, he will pay dividends because he's going to enhance all your troops, whether they are vehicle, neutrals, infantry, Astartes, it doesn't matter. 2 turns of that, and he is stronger, and anything else that's on the board with him is stronger. He can swing. Now, he's a legendary, obviously, and that's a relentless ability, so there's answers to your opponent, but they have to answer that. And if they answer that, there's other cards that you can bring out later that they can't answer. So there's a decent trade-off there. Corvan Squad, as far as stats go, they're not fantastic, right? 5 energy for a 4/3 is not great. The rally effect is really the big thing. They come out and they kill something, ideally with like a Seek and Destroy effect, 3 damage on that thing, or 3 damage to end the game on your opponent's warlord. Conjunction with Santar dealing 2 and your Medusan Carapace, and you've dealt 7 damage before you've really done anything else at the end of the game. But then you put a 4/3 body out. In addition to that, your opponent has to respond to, and they're not bad. They don't go in every deck. Again, they're like Santar, solo Santar, they do really good. Solo Ferrus Manus, they're okay. Not great in Medusan, because they're low health. They're at 5 energy. They're not going to really stick around very much. You're better off playing with like a stealth troop. But they're okay. They're okay. Now, Rapier Lance. These guys are nice for their ability. When you look at it, 4 energy to deal 8 damage to a non-warlord enemy. That can be a Titan weapon. So these can be Titan weapon killers. The problem is the cost in the stat. The fact that they're bounceable by Ambassador Melgator and they come out at 5 energy. There's a lot of answers to it. They're just hard to throw out. If they come out as a result of Captured Forge and you're able to drop 2 of them at 3 energy and make your opponent, have to choose. If your opponent can't get rid of a Rapier Laser and they're a troop-based deck, they're not going to be able to gain any more footing at that point, because anything at 6 energy or up, you're most likely going to be able to kill with that ability. That's just a brutal, brutal ability. I do like the fact that they've got 6 health, but that attack is just very weak, and the cost is what kind of drives it. I think it's a balanced card. It's not an epic that you put in every deck. It's an epic that you have to put in deck if you're building for a set design. And honestly, I'd rather have Rapier Laser from a Captured Forge than I would in my deck and include it that way. Now, Ralph Squad, these guys are great. These guys are actually really good in the difference between Rapier Laser, which for 5 energy is a 3/6 vehicle. For 4, it deals 8 to a non-warlord enemy. These guys are 3/5s, so their stats are slightly less. Rarity is less. But for 2 energy, they deal 5 damage. So whereas you've got basically a 1 energy for 2 damage exchange here for the 4 for 8. You're paying 2 for 5. You're not getting 4 damage, and it can go anywhere, and that's really good. And it puts a threat on your opponent, especially late game. If you drop Routh with a secondary troop or frontline troop, your opponent has got to deal with this guy one way or the other. And ideally, at 5 energy, they've already used Melgator to bounce a Galba squad or an Atropius or something like that, and so you can play him unchecked. Now, ultimately, the 5-drop that makes the Iron Hands what they are right now is a Servo Arm. The Servo Arm initially did not heal to your warlord. It was just to a friendly troop. But when they changed it to a friendly unit and it was able to heal your warlord, this card became much better. I think it actually cost 4 at release, and they changed it to 5 as a result of that. I could be wrong there. But anybody who's faced 2 servo-armed Gabriel Santars with a Medusan Carapace or Ferrus Manus in that manner, where he's healing 6, dealing 2, has attack 10, you can understand the beast that is the Iron Hands. Does it make the faction? At this point in time, it kind of feels like it does. If you don't have a servo arm in your deck, are you not playing Iron Hands? And many will say that that's the case. I think there's 2 decks that you could play without servo arm and do okay in. You could play Medusan without servo arm and not have any penalty whatsoever. And you could also make the argument for DuCaine. DuCaine still can benefit from a servo arm, but Medusan doesn't need as much. At 5 energy, Medusan wants to be putting troops down that he can use to give them sneak attack versus healing. That's not necessary. Ancient Brantar. These guys, stat-wise, they're okay. Ability-wise, that's a strong ability, but they just are bleh. They only see play mainly, I think, as a result of being created by Captured Forge, and if you bring them out for 4 energy, that's a great buy. But for 6, I'll pass. Not a fan. A crack grenade can take it out. If a 3 energy can destroy my 6 energy investment, it's not worth it. And while crack grenade doesn't get played as much as it should be getting played a lot more right now with Proctor and a lot of people complaining about vehicles. It should be getting more play. I always rank it off of that. How easy is it for my opponent with a standard card to be able to get rid of this high cost investment? Are they trading as much energy as I am to put it out in play? I like Ancient Gorlock better when he gets created for 4 because he's got higher health. I mean, by trading off 6-5 versus 5-7, we've got 11 total versus 12 with the ability to gain more. And that 7 health means that he has a much better chance at sticking around on your turn, getting healed by a Deus Ex Inferum or a Servo Arm or DuCaine, gaining attack, and then you're off to the races from there. I don't put them in my deck, though, because, again, I prefer to have them come out with Captured Forge. I do have them in a Relentless deck challenge for DuCaine, because I just basically threw every Relentless deck in there. And sometimes when I play with that can get daunting, especially if you start giving them, like Marks of Chaos and stuff. Why Marks of Chaos? Because I have cultists that are Relentless in there. Captain Kagos. This is probably this... That's tough. I would probably say these guys are the 3rd best epic in the faction, with Servo Arm being the number 1 epic, and good old Tarek Squad being number 2. I would put these guys at number 3. They could be higher given that they heal 1 to all your units, and that's fantastic. And the stat-wise, 6 for 6/6 frontline, perfect. But the fact that Breach is a very effective and very commonly played card is really what holds me back from giving him too much praise, because it's very easy, especially if you're playing against Iron Hands. You hold on to that Breach. You know what's coming, and when they play Kagos, you breach it, and then you follow up with either a Weenie Troop or Ricochet, and you've paid minimal to get rid of their big nasty guy. If he sticks around, he's going to do a lot of healing, and it's going to become a problem. Not to mention he's a frontline, but he does have to stick around. Now, Captured Forge, you don't have to play this deck. I think it goes really well with Santar and solo Ferrus Manus more than it does DuCaine and Medusan, who I feel as if they should have their deck really built, already fine-tuned with what they're getting, and you don't want random stuff. But creating 3 random Iron Hands vehicles in your deck for 2 less is nice. If you can play this on 6 energy, that means on your next turn, whether you create a Gorlock or 2 or a Rapier or any of these higher cost guys, these 7s or 9s and 10s, and bring them out on 7 energy, 8 energy, it's a really good value card. Do not get it confused artwork wise with the Fall of Gardenal. I did that at Bar Night Legions this last week, and it lost me the game, and that was my bad. So it was a misplay. I'm gonna blame it on the alcohol. Ferrum. Ferrum is, yeah. Why not? Why not have two of these? Why not? Especially if you're playing with a solo warlord. It's a pricey card. Don't get me wrong. 6 for 5 doesn't quite feel right, but dealing 5 damage directly, however you want it, and then additional 2 splash damage is fantastic. This can end games. It very easily does. In conjunction with whatever you've got from your warlord. If you're playing a solo warlord, you should have 2. If you're playing a mono warlord, you should at least have 1, because dealing 5 damage direct and then splash damage, that's just really good. Fall of Gardenal is nice. It's a maxed up defensive satellites, but it hits everybody, and that's the trade-off. So it works really well if you've got a servo arm that's been healing you, or you're going to continue to be healed. Early on, if you're behind in health and you don't have any other way to recover health, it's not going to help you as much, but it can be very nice to clear board. However, as time has gone on, this card here is very easily replaced by Planetary Purge for 1 less energy, which is a neutral. Now, yes, Planetary Purge has been recently changed to be a little bit more random, and it might hit your warlord or your opponent's warlord and then stop any purging that's taking place, but maybe that's what you want anyways. So you really have to ask yourself that, and especially if you're just playing with just your one warlord who doesn't have any troops, and that your odds of it hitting you versus hitting you 4 or 5 troops on your opponent's side, it might be worth it. It might be worth it. So I would consider the neutral options before playing Fall of Gardenal. Marlock Terminators. These guys have got Relentless Healing too, and that's very nice. They are very costly though, and I don't see them get a lot of play. Honestly, they don't bring any sort of rally to the game. They don't offer any long-lasting effects. You could put them with a Medusan and give them the escape vent, but I think that late in the game, you're better off having like a Vulturax. Just not fantastic. Their attack doesn't get upped any. I'd pass on them. Predator Executioner. Now, this gets overlooked a lot. It's got a great ability to just destroy an enemy troop, but it costs a lot. It costs 5, and that's expensive. It also has 9, so you have a choice. Do I deal 9 damage, or do I destroy a troop? You've got some flexibility there, but they also have 5 health, so again, crack grenade. I don't include them in my deck. I don't think there's really any Iron Hands vehicles I include in my deck. If I'm going for Iron Hands vehicles, I just include Captured Forge. That's just the way it is. There's no reason. This doesn't offer me anything on the play, not a rally effect or anything like that, so pass on it. Now the hammer. Oh, the hammer has been improved. The hammer for the longest time was definitely, not arguably, definitely the worst legendary in the game, especially for a faction card. It was terrible. You drew a card, and then you dealt damage equal to the cost of that card. Not equal to the number of cards in your hand. It was equal to the cost of that card across the board, but not to your opponent's warlord. So you could draw a 10 and deal 10 damage to everything. You could also draw a 2 or a 1. It was terrible. I love the change. It's not perfect, but the fact that it exchanges itself for your hand, so you're never going to be shorting yourself when you play it. Draw a card, deal damage to all non-world enemies, which includes Titans, equal to the number of cards in your hand. That's powerful, especially if you're going up against a deck and you know that they're going troopy. You build your hand with like 8 or 9 cards, let them get to that big fat nasty point at 7 energy, play it. Everything that they've got is gone, and you're sitting pretty. You've only played 1 card, and now you can build up everything else. The hammer takes some strategy in your deck building. You do have to consider that, yes, I'm going to put the hammer in my deck because I think I'm going to be able to play it more often. If you're just throwing out low-cost troops and you're not going to have a huge hand, don't play the hammer. There's no point in paying 7 energy to deal 2 damage to everything. It's just not worth it. But if you're going to have a strategy and a game style where you're going to have 5 or 6 or 7 cards in your hand at a time, the hammer is very good. It's a shame that it doesn't target your opponent's warlord as well, but it makes sense why it doesn't. Because then it would become a better heroine than the heroine is. And while it's legendary, yes, It's something that your opponent can't do anything about, and they can see it coming, and meanwhile you're healing and healing and healing, and the Iron Hands already have got that attrition style going for them. So they're really about board attrition more than they are about direct damage attrition. That's a secondary effect. Iron Father also saw some change here. Before, these guys had just a Relentless. They didn't have the Rally, and that meant that there was no reason to play these guys at 8 energy. With the Rally effect, you actually can gain a benefit from them immediately, and you should. I think the game has seen some changes to the cards enhancing troops. It's really great when you think about Iron Father coming in. Again, I'm going to go back to the Arcology. Arcology creates a troop at the end of your turn. It's a 2/2. It's not much, right? But if you bring out an Iron Father, and then that becomes a 3/3, and it might survive, not to mention he's pumping your Arcology, and now your opponent has to deal with your Arcology as well as your Iron Father. And let's say they get rid of that Arcology. Then they got a bunch of uncivilized populace that at the start of your turn are going to gain +1/+1. They're not great having 2 of in a deck, but if you have 1 and you play it at the right time, they make a big play. I do like them better than they used to be. I'm still on the fence as far as how often I use them, but when I do use them, I do enjoy the effect. I think there's better ways to go about it, but again, all honesty up there, I do play the Iron Hands a lot more for challenges than I do play them with anything else, so I'm probably just gaining it more from that experience. Now, Thunderhawk 1169, I've seen decks built around this, and that's great, and that's fantastic that decks can be. Primarily built around the idea of bringing out the old 9-drop Mechanicum, this big nasty guy, the Lambda Zeta 01. He comes out, he's got flank, and he's got cleave 5, and that's just nasty. But now we've got some really good stuff here that can come out with shield and have 9/9. Come out, 3/12, or come out with 6/9 shield. These shielded troops that are vehicles coming out with flank, it's awesome. That's fantastic. In theory, it's great. But the problem is the cost of this card and how it does. If you don't have any vehicles, like if you have to build your deck around this card and you only have like high cost vehicles, it's possible you don't see this card, so you never get a benefit from it. More importantly, you've got a bunch of high cost cards in your hand that you can only play so much of, or you've drawn up all the vehicles by the time you get the Thunderhawk. It's nice to see it when it goes off, but it's not something that is effective. I think this card could be radically improved, not just in cost wise, but change it around. Or even if it was like cost 7 or 6, and it allowed you to have the same effect for any vehicle under that cost, or create a vehicle rather than pull it from your deck, I think it would be a better card. As it is now, it's just not worth including. There was a patch that was expected, I forget what faction it was for, but we didn't end up getting that patch. We got an Iron Hands patch, and one of the cards that was included in that patch was Venerable Comac, which gained this, if you control no other troops, heal 5 as a Relentless. And nobody asked for that. His stat got bumped up, I think, from a 7/7 or a 7/8 to an 8/8. Nobody asked. Nobody uses this card. It's not great. I'd rather have the Ancient Gorlock than a healing 5, and that's nice. I mean, it's great if you're healing 5, but there are a lot more vehicles that are better off if you control no other troops. And as a faction, it doesn't make any sense because the Iron Hands are all about having troops. So if you're going to build with troops in your deck, you're going to have more than one. Why would you get penalized for it? So pass on that. You don't need that guy. Tarragon. This is a really great common. This is actually a really good common. As far as its cost goes, it doesn't seem like a lot. But late in the game, if your opponent has already blown their hard removals on your beefy frontline troops or your Bargus or your Galba squad, and you drop a Tarragon glaive tank and either park it behind a front line or just have it sit there, your opponent's going to be sweating bullets because they're going to take 5 to a random enemy, which may just be their warlord, as well as the face strike for 7 damage from this thing. These guys are really good. I really enjoy it when I get them from a captured forge, because as I said, play them on 7 energy, and then they get rid of it, and then you play a second one, and they just throw up their hands in the air. And Atlas Extra takes that to the next level. While it doesn't deal damage directly, that Relentless Destroy Random Troop shuts the board down for your opponent. It's great. This is a legendary that is a great legendary, but because it can be created with Captured Forge, it's not one that you need to have in your deck. I mean, if you really want to, you can, but there certainly is no reason to have it in your deck. But it comes out with shield, which is great if you have it flank, but it's even better if it just sits there and puts a threat on your opponent, because now they can't play just one big unit. They have to play two, and one of those is going to get destroyed, and then they're going to take 9 damage. This just can just kind of make your opponent throw up the white flag. It's just a power card. And if you get lucky enough, and can sometimes happen, and with Captured Forge, create 2 of those in your hand, put them out at 8, put it out at 9. Yeah, it's a good game. It's a good game. The Iron Hands counterattack, again, like I said, this is one of my favorite counterattacks. It's not necessarily something that you can have in your deck, but it's just a great card, great counterattack to have. And if you're building with Santar, you want to build with that in mind, that yes, you can have that shield and just play it smart. In terms of legendaries for this game, for this faction, the legendaries are very situational, and you can build an Iron Hands deck relatively cheap. And that's something I'm going to be talking about in one of my next videos, is budget decks. The Iron Hands are very friendly in that regard. I think Bargus is probably the only legendary that you absolutely need to have. The Hammer is situational. Sistar is not so great. Atlas Astra can be created with Captured Forge. Medusan Carapace is also situational depending on your warlord. And I would say Ferrus Manus, I mean, obviously Primarch's legendary warlords are your number one, but because you can't pick them up in the shop all the time, that's not necessarily something I can recommend. Although he was recently in the shop, and maybe he will be again. I'm gonna pass on that art though. I'm just gonna. I prefer this guy. I prefer this art. That's just better. That's just better. But yeah, they're decent. There's a lot of cards. I think I would probably say there's about 4 cards here that are really dated, or that could see some significant improvement to make the faction a little bit better. Right? Not a lot, but just a little bit. But overall, they do well because their warlords are strong, and their warlords are fueled by this card specifically. And I think if you tweaked either that card or some of these other cards, you could get a little bit more versatile deck building. Right now, Ferrus Manus is the driving force behind the faction. Santar's kind of fallen by the wayside. Medusan doesn't see a lot of play, although he can be a threat. But they're not bad. Personally, I could play them with challenges, but if you're looking to get into a new faction, they're relatively easy to get into. You don't need all their legends. You don't need all their epics. You just need Chadric Squad, and find a way to keep Chadric Squad alive. And you'll just have good experiences from there. Chadric Squad and Servo Arm. That's it. Get those 2 first before you get anything else for the faction, and go from there. So that's it for me, guys. That's the Iron Hands card by card reboot. I hope it was somewhat informational. I hope it gave you some perspective here in terms of cards that work well with these guys, especially the newer factions. I know I've mentioned Arcology up the wazoo. I still would support Ekratrez, getting him pumped up with Ferrus Manus, or healing because he's next to DuCaine, and using that ability constantly is a very nice buff. The same goes for your Beast of Fyra. As I said, being able to enhance that with Ferrus Manus, or giving him a Power Mace, which is an option. That's something that can exist. Cards that create other cards are always good. That's just the way it is. You know, your Mount Pharos, your Pyramid of Photep. The Mechanicum have offered a lot of vehicles, but also War Room, being able to draw that Servo Arm and make it a 3 cost and play it on your next turn. If you're building a troop heavy deck and you've only got several tactics in your deck, War Room is a good selection for that. And as far as for the neutrals go, Kai'Sa Lane in the same way that Chadric Squad, supported by or Jubok, these are legendaries. I understand most of these are legendary rares, but the value that they can give you is huge. And supply lines is probably better with neutral vehicles than it is with Imperial, with Iron Hands vehicles, but it makes a lot of good stuff with Medusan, because I think you can bring these guys in at 2 and then use them to sneak attack, or you can bring out Vorax cheaper and use Vorax to sneak attack. You can just bring out the Mortar Carrier with DuCaine and then drop these guys for 2 at 5 energy, or 4 at 5 energy, and then use DuCaine's ability to protect them from flankers. There's a lot of good cards that work well with them, mainly using their warlords to enhance what those good cards already do, because that's how they play. So That's it for me, guys. I hope it was good. I hope it was a good reboot. I hope it was informative, and I hope you learned something from it. And if you're interested in playing Iron Hands, give them a go. They are formidable. They're not legendary heavy. They just require you to to admit that the flesh is weak. Just admit that the flesh is weak and grind harder than anybody else. And that's how Ferrus would do it. So that's it for me, guys. Until next time, keep playing Legions, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.